6 times he lunged in to silence her voice. 6 times he tried to erase her dignity. But the 7th time, the room shook. The chamber was already heavy with tension, a place where every word carried the weight of history. Cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking like unblinking eyes, waiting for the drama to unfold. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready, while staffers whispered that this would be the clash everyone had been anticipating. And at the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett sat poised, her papers neatly arranged, her eyes steady, her tone measured. But before her argument could even take shape, Stephen Miller's voice cut across the air like a blade. It wasn't the interruption itself that jolted the room, it was the tone. Sharp. Condescending. Dismissive. He leaned in, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, as if silencing a black woman in Congress was his natural right. Gasps rippled in the gallery. Crockett stopped mid-sentence, her lips pressed together, waiting. He had stolen the moment, and he knew it. She tried again, voice calm but firm. And again, Miller barged in, cutting her rhythm, dismissing her point, weaponizing his interruptions as if each one chipped away at her authority. The first time, onlookers were startled. By the third, whispers filled the room. By the fifth, even seasoned staffers shook their heads in disbelief. This wasn't debate, it was domination dressed as discourse. Yet Crockett never raised her voice. She never broke her focus. Each time he intruded, she let the silence hang just long enough to remind the audience who had been wronged. Each time he jabbed, she seemed to gather more strength, as though the interruptions were fuel rather than distractions. Miller, emboldened by his own echo, went for the 6th strike. His voice, dripping with arrogance, sought to bury her words under his. The arrogance filled the room like smoke, suffocating, deliberate. And yet, in the midst of the haze, Crockett's eyes didn't waver. She was waiting, not for permission, not for mercy, but for her moment. And as the interruptions piled up, so did the stakes. This was never just an argument between two politicians. It was never simply a matter of policy disagreements or parliamentary procedure. No, what unfolded in that chamber spoke to something far deeper, something written into the fabric of America itself. Because every interruption, every condescending dismissal, every attempt to silence Jasmine Crockett was not only aimed at her as a woman or as a representative, it was aimed at the millions of people who saw themselves reflected in her presence. She carried into that room the history of voices long denied, voices that had been told to wait their turn, to lower their tone, to speak only when spoken to. The interruptions echoed generations of attempts to erase women, to belittle immigrants, to sideline communities of color who had fought tooth and nail just to be heard. And so, Miller's smirk, his cutting tone, wasn't just arrogance, it was a symbol. It was the old guard clinging to power by muting those who threatened its grip. And that is why the atmosphere was electric. Every camera captured not just two people on opposite sides of a debate, but the living collision between past and future, dominance and dignity. Crockett's calm in the face of chaos became its own kind of defiance. She wasn't just defending her right to finish a sentence, she was defending the right of every overlooked, underestimated American to finally stand tall and speak without fear of being shoved aside. The weight of the confrontation grew heavier with each interruption. On social media, clips were already leaking out, snippets of Miller's dismissive gestures and Crockett's poised silence spreading faster than wildfire. Viewers at home weren't just watching, they were feeling it, reliving their own memories of being silenced in classrooms, in workplaces, in boardrooms. Her fight became theirs. And that's where the stakes sharpened into something undeniable. Because this wasn't about winning a point on legislation. It wasn't about whose policy would pass or whose motion would stall. This was about legitimacy, whose voice is recognized as valid, whose perspective is deemed worthy, whose humanity is acknowledged in the highest chambers of American power. By the 6th interruption, the question hovering in the air wasn't, will she respond? It was bigger, far more urgent, what will her response mean for the rest of us? The room wasn't waiting for an answer to a policy issue, it was waiting for a crack in the armor of a system that too often thrives on silencing. And as Crockett sat, steady, patient, refusing to be shaken, she was crafting something larger than a counterpoint. She was building toward a moment that promised to shatter the illusion that interruption equals control. Miller thought he was winning ground with every cut-in, but in truth, he was laying the tracks for his own undoing. Because what happened next doesn't just shift the room, it changes the conversation nationwide. Stephen Miller was no stranger to confrontation. For years, he had cultivated a reputation as the architect of chaos behind polished facades, a strategist whose sharp elbows and sharper tongue left colleagues wary and adversaries wary. To some, he was brilliant, a mind capable of bending policy debates, shaping narratives, and controlling the rhythm of political discourse with surgical precision. To others, he was ruthless, a man for whom winning was not enough, the opponent had to be humiliated, diminished, and rendered voiceless. From his earliest days in the corridors of power, Miller displayed a hunger for dominance. He thrived in environments where intimidation could be deployed as a tool, and where subtle cruelty masked itself as tactical genius. Those who underestimated him were quickly corrected. A sneer here, an interruption there, a carefully timed smear or a loaded question, each move was calculated to assert authority and unsettle those who dared to oppose him. Over time, his pattern became unmistakable: silence the dissenting voice, control the conversation, and ensure the spotlight never shifted away from him. His ideological rigidity only sharpened his edge. He carried his principles with the weight of absolutes, framing his positions as moral imperatives, leaving no room for debate or nuance. Opposing him wasn't just a tactical error, it was, in his mind, a challenge to the very framework of truth he had built around himself. And yet, this inflexibility, while empowering him in controlled settings, often concealed a brittle core. Those who looked closely could see the cracks beneath the bravado, the obsession with control that sometimes veered into desperation. Miller's history was filled with moments where arrogance propelled him forward. In hearings, he would interrupt, deride, and belittle, crafting a performance of invincibility. Opponents often faltered under the pressure, their arguments derailed before they could gain traction. On social media, pundits dissected his every move, some in awe of his tactical mind, others in horror at the casual cruelty he displayed. He had mastered the art of spectacle, turning debate into theater where his voice dominated and the room bent to his rhythm. Yet, even as his methods were effective, they relied on the assumption that every opponent would bend or flinch. Miller had rarely faced someone who could withstand the storm he conjured. His confidence, rooted in past victories, blinded him to the possibility that patience, composure, and moral clarity could counteract intimidation. He had honed a script, a series of calculated disruptions, believing it unassailable. The interruptions, the dismissive tone, the sharp jabs, each was a rehearsed dance designed to assert control. But tonight, the music had changed. Those who knew him warned that his arrogance was both his weapon and his weakness. When unchecked, it could become self-defeating. And tonight, Jasmine Crockett was not a typical opponent. She carried with her the history of marginalized voices, a calm intensity that demanded recognition, and a clarity of purpose that refused to be rattled. Every cut-in, every sneer that Miller directed toward her became not a demonstration of power, but a display of vulnerability. The room noticed it, the subtle hesitations, the flickers of uncertainty, the way his energy escalated in an almost frantic attempt to dominate the narrative. Miller's reputation suggested he was untouchable, a man who could bulldoze through debate and emerge victorious. And yet, beneath the surface, his strategy was fragile, dependent on the assumption that his opponent would break first. Crockett's steady gaze, her refusal to be silenced, and her unyielding presence began to chip away at the control he relied on so heavily. He barked, he prodded, he leaned into arrogance as armor. And yet, the louder he barked, the thinner his armor became. Jasmine Crockett's story begins not in the gilded halls of power, but in the quiet resilience of Texas neighborhoods where the stakes of daily life were measured in perseverance and determination. She grew up in communities where voices were often ignored, where potential was overlooked, and where young people were taught that speaking up was a risk. Yet, from an early age, Crockett understood that words were not just sounds, they were instruments of change. Every sentence, every argument carried the power to challenge injustice, to assert dignity, to demand recognition. Her journey through the corridors of education was marked by tenacity. Teachers quickly recognized a mind that refused shortcuts and a spirit that refused compromise on principle. Crockett's intelligence was not flashy, it was deliberate, honed through late nights of study, through arguments refined in debate clubs, through the meticulous crafting of ideas and strategies. But what set her apart wasn't just intellect, it was a sense of purpose. She understood that knowledge without action was hollow, that theory without application left change unmade. Crockett's legal career became her proving ground. As a lawyer, she confronted systems designed to silence the marginalized. She took on cases that others deemed too complex, too politically charged, or too controversial. In every courtroom, she demonstrated a rare blend of precision and empathy, crafting arguments that were rigorous yet human, persuasive yet grounded in fairness. Her colleagues noticed that she did not need to raise her voice to command attention, her presence alone demanded it. Where some relied on theatrics, Crockett relied on preparation, principle, and the quiet authority of someone who had fought for every inch of recognition she had ever earned. But it was in politics that her full strength became undeniable. Entering Congress, she carried the hopes of communities that had too often been overlooked or dismissed. Every speech, every committee appearance, every vote was informed by a deep understanding of both policy and human consequence. She understood the theater of debate, yes, but she also understood its responsibilities, that words spoken from the floor could ripple through lives, shaping public opinion, influencing decisions, and validating or dismissing the experiences of millions. Her demeanor stood in stark contrast to figures like Stephen Miller. Where he wielded interruption as a weapon, Crockett wielded patience as armor. Where he relied on intimidation, she relied on moral clarity. Where he sought attention through arrogance, she commanded respect through dignity. Each encounter with adversaries reinforced the lesson that true power did not lie in loudness or aggression, but in steadiness, empathy, and unwavering commitment to truth. Crockett's rise was neither accidental nor smooth. She faced obstacles that tested her resolve, political maneuvering, systemic bias, and the quiet doubt of those who underestimated her because of her youth, her race, or her gender. Each challenge was met with careful strategy, tireless preparation, and an unshakable belief in the causes she championed. She cultivated alliances rooted in shared values rather than fleeting convenience, knowing that integrity built resilience, while compromise often built only fragility. The admiration she earned was not merely for her skill, but for her approach to leadership. She embodied a form of power that inspired confidence rather than fear, that elevated conversations rather than suppressed them. In every debate, every public forum, every tense exchange, she carried with her the unspoken message that presence, preparation, and principle were forms of authority far stronger than aggression or bluster. And so, when she walked into the chamber facing Miller, she brought with her decades of preparation, a lifetime of understanding what it meant to be underestimated, and a mind sharpened by challenges both personal and professional. Her eyes, calm but resolute, reflected the journey that had brought her here. Every pause, every measured breath, every carefully chosen word was the culmination of that journey. She was ready, not just to speak, but to assert the dignity of every voice Miller had tried to silence. And so when interruption number 7 came, she was more than ready. The debate began with a tension so palpable it seemed to thrum through the room like a living thing. Crockett opened with a carefully constructed point, each word deliberate, measured, a reflection of her sharp legal mind and unwavering purpose. But before she could finish, Miller leaned forward, his voice slicing through the air with a cutting edge. The first interruption was brief, a snide comment, a dismissive correction, but it landed like a stone in still water, rippling uneasily across the chamber. Crockett paused, allowing the disruption to hang in the air, her composure unshaken, eyes fixed on the larger goal. By the second interruption, the room was on alert. Whispers swirled through the gallery. Cameras caught the flicker of annoyance on aides' faces, the shifting of reporters in their seats, the subtle tightening of journalists' grips on their pens. Miller's tone was sharper now, dripping with condescension, his words designed to belittle and unsettle. But Crockett's response was silence, deliberate and commanding. She didn't need to respond immediately. Each pause became a small reclaiming of power, a reminder to the audience that the true voice in the room was hers. The third interruption escalated, louder, more aggressive, a calculated attempt to intimidate. Murmurs rose in the gallery as onlookers sensed the growing imbalance. Yet Crockett maintained her rhythm, her calm presence a stark contrast to Miller's bluster. She allowed him the theater, knowing that every jab, every sneer, only sharpened the tension for the moment that would matter most. The crowd leaned forward, sensing the drama unfolding, feeling it in their own pulses, a collective anticipation building with each exchange. By the fourth, Miller's strategy had become almost theatrical. He interrupted mid-sentence, injected sarcasm, attempted to derail her logic, and even leaned back with a smirk, expecting reactions of surprise or discomfort. But Crockett's gaze remained steady, her expression serene, her mind entirely focused. The silence she maintained was not weakness, it was strategy. Each interruption only highlighted the contrast between his aggression and her dignity, a dynamic the room could not ignore. The fifth interruption was sharper still, almost personal in its insinuation, aimed at diminishing her credibility. Gasps punctuated the chamber as spectators processed the audacity. But Crockett's calm endured. She didn't react with anger or defensiveness. Instead, she let the moment extend, allowing the audience to witness the dissonance between Miller's arrogance and her unwavering composure. The contrast became a spectacle in itself, one that deepened the suspense and increased the audience's emotional investment. By the sixth, the tension was almost unbearable. Miller leaned forward aggressively, his voice commanding, his interruptions designed to dominate, to silence her entirely. The room held its breath. Every eye was on Crockett, waiting to see if the storm would finally break her. But she didn't falter. She listened, she weighed, she measured, each second intensifying the anticipation of the inevitable climax. Even as Miller barked, pressing his advantage, her poise communicated a message louder than any words. She was not intimidated, she was not diminished, and she was preparing for her moment. And then, the seventh time, Crockett finally struck. The seventh interruption arrived like a signal, a final challenge hurled across the room. Miller, sensing he had her cornered, leaned forward once more, voice sharp and cutting, certain that he could dismantle her argument before it had a chance to land. He didn't realize that every prior interruption, every condescending remark, every attempt to silence her had done the opposite. It had sharpened her focus, steeled her resolve, and prepared her for the moment that would redefine the room. Crockett inhaled deeply, letting the tension swell around her, absorbing every expectant glance, every subtle gasp, every whispered anticipation in the gallery. She did not rush. She did not flinch. She allowed the silence to stretch long enough that the audience felt it, almost physically, a pressure building in the air, demanding release. Then, with deliberate clarity, Crockett began. Her voice was calm, precise, and unwavering, cutting through the noise like a blade through mist. She chose her words with surgical exactness, each one landing in the space Miller had tried to dominate, each phrase a reclamation of authority he had assumed was his. There was no anger, no theatrical display, just undeniable clarity. "You may interrupt," she said, her tone steady, measured, almost conversational, "but your interruptions do not erase the truth. They cannot diminish the reality that the people I represent will be heard." The room went still. The silence was immediate and suffocating, heavy with anticipation and disbelief. Miller's smirk faltered, subtle at first, as the weight of the words sank in. His usual confidence wavered. He opened his mouth, perhaps to interject, perhaps to reclaim dominance, but the pause that Crockett held before continuing froze him. She gave him no space to respond, no opportunity to deflect. She was both shield and sword in that instant, delivering a verbal strike that left him unmoored. "And let me be clear," she continued, each word deliberate, resonating beyond the chamber walls, "your voice may be louder, but it does not speak for the people who have waited too long to be counted. Your interruptions are noise. My responsibility is to the truth, to justice, and to those who have been silenced for generations." Crockett's delivery was unhurried, allowing each phrase to echo in the chamber, a metronome of moral authority. The gallery was captivated, even seasoned staffers leaned forward, sensing that this was no ordinary exchange. Cameras caught every micro-expression, the narrowing of eyes, the tightening of jaws, the subtle hitch in Miller's breath as the clarity of her argument cut through the chaos he had created. Social media would later replay this moment, each pause, each carefully measured word, becoming iconic, a case study in poise and precision under pressure. Miller's face betrayed a flicker of panic. The arrogance that had driven 6 prior interruptions now trembled at the edge of exposure. His usual posture of command seemed suddenly fragile, brittle. For the first time, he was no longer dictating the rhythm of the room. He was reacting, off balance, unsure, and the audience sensed it instinctively. Every eye in the chamber followed Crockett's steady gaze, her unshakable calm a counterweight to his unraveling. It was a reversal of roles so complete that the collective breath of the audience caught in anticipation. And finally, Crockett said, leaning ever so slightly forward, locking eyes with the chamber, with the cameras, with history itself, "The measure of leadership is not how loudly one interrupts, but how faithfully one serves the people. And I stand here committed, unwavering, and unshaken, ready to ensure that every voice, every story, every truth is recognized, respected, and never silenced." The impact was instantaneous. Silence engulfed the room like a wave. Miller blinked, caught mid-thought, his habitual retort stifled by the precision of her timing. The audience leaned in, collectively suspended in a moment that balanced on the edge of disbelief and awe. Whispered murmurs filled the gallery, but the silence held firm, emphasizing the gravity of what had just occurred. Every interruption that had come before now seemed to underscore the brilliance of her 7th, each attempt to dominate having paved the way for a flawless, devastating takedown. Reaction came in stages. A subtle ripple of applause began in the back of the chamber, spreading slowly as viewers realized the magnitude of what they had witnessed. Reporters exchanged incredulous glances, the pens paused mid-note. Even those who had doubted her poise felt compelled to acknowledge it. Crockett had turned every assault into an opportunity, every jab into a demonstration of dignity and authority. Miller's energy, once commanding, now faltered under the weight of clarity and composure. The moment stretched long enough to imprint itself on memory. Every camera, every lens, every recording device captured not just words, but the atmosphere, the shift in power, the reversal of expectation. Social media would later erupt, replaying the clip endlessly, the pauses, the cadence, the calm defiance. Memes, threads, and commentary amplified the moment, each post reinforcing what the room had already felt viscerally. Crockett's authority was unassailable, her poise unshakable, her timing perfect. Miller, for all his prior confidence, could only sit back, momentarily exposed, unarmed against a counterattack that required no theatrics, only intellect and integrity. The room, the gallery, the nation, everyone watching, held its breath in stunned acknowledgement. Crockett had not just answered him, she had redefined the terms of the debate entirely. But outside that chamber, the firestorm had only just begun. Within minutes of Crockett's 7th line, the chamber's tense silence was replaced by a digital roar. Clips of the exchange were already circulating on social media, each share multiplying exponentially. Hashtags like #Crockett7th and #SitDownMiller trended within the hour, dominating feeds and trending lists alike. The moment had transcended the walls of the chamber, it had become a cultural event, a flashpoint for conversations far beyond political reporting. Memes began to appear almost instantly, each capturing her composure, his unraveling, the contrast between dignity and arrogance in ways that resonated with people across the country. Late-night shows and political commentators dissected every beat of the exchange, replaying the footage again and again. Pundits debated not only the policy points at stake, but the performance itself, the symbolism of a black woman standing unwavering in the face of a relentless interrupter. Celebrities tweeted their admiration, amplifying the conversation to audiences who might never have tuned into the hearing itself. The clips were shared, remixed, and captioned, each version reinforcing the narrative. This was more than a debate, it was a statement, a challenge to power structures, and a vindication of patience, intelligence, and poise. Across platforms, viewers expressed a visceral reaction. Comments poured in from every corner, recounting personal experiences of being silenced, dismissed, or underestimated, each one connecting to Crockett's quiet defiance. The story became a mirror, reflecting struggles that extended beyond politics, workplace interruptions, classroom dismissals, societal dismissals. Her victory was symbolic, and it resonated because it was universal. Every retweet, every like, every repost was a collective acknowledgement that this was a moment to celebrate, not just her, but the idea that voices long silenced could rise, and be heard. Journalists covering the event noted the remarkable transformation of the room itself. What had started as a tense chamber filled with whispers and shifting eyes became a scene of ripple effect energy. Analysts spoke of the Crockett effect, where the decorum and integrity of one individual reshaped a narrative that had initially been dominated by interruption and arrogance. Public sentiment shifted rapidly, with opinion polls and social media analytics confirming a surge in admiration for her composure, strategy, and moral authority. Political operatives began to dissect the implications. Allies praised her decisiveness and restraint. Opponents recognized the danger of underestimating someone so prepared and unwavering. News outlets published op-eds exploring the intersection of race, gender, and power in the exchange, framing it as a modern lesson in representation and dignity. The coverage amplified the moment, ensuring it would not fade quickly from public memory. Even outside traditional political circles, the moment resonated. Influencers in business, education, and community leadership shared the clip, using it as an example of patience, strategic thinking, and moral courage under pressure. The debate became a case study, a teaching moment for those striving to navigate environments where voices are routinely interrupted, dismissed, or marginalized. Crockett's example inspired reflection and conversation on how dignity can confront arrogance without abandoning grace. Yet the explosion of attention wasn't merely celebratory. Critics of Crockett scrambled to reinterpret the event, framing it as political theater or overstating the significance of a single moment. But even as the debate over interpretation raged, the clarity of her seventh line cut through the noise. The visual and emotional imprint of that counterattack left an undeniable mark. The contrast between composure and arrogance, patience and aggression, integrity and posturing was unmissable. The ripple effect continued to grow as memes, threads, and clips crossed borders, inspiring discussions internationally. The event became a symbol for anyone confronting dismissal or interruption, a moment of representation that underscored the power of calm authority and moral clarity. Social media wasn't just amplifying a debate, it was reframing the conversation about who gets to be heard, whose perspective matters, and what true leadership looks like in the face of relentless opposition. And through all the noise, one message rang clear. In the aftermath of the chamber's storm, the lesson of that day extended far beyond politics. What began as a confrontation over words, over policy, over power, revealed a truth far deeper: dignity can never be silenced, even in the face of aggression. Crockett's calm composure and unwavering focus had turned what seemed like a disadvantage, the relentless interruptions of a seasoned adversary, into a demonstration of authority, integrity, and moral clarity. It was a moment that transcended the debate itself, offering a universal lesson about patience, courage, and the strength of measured action. Every interruption had been a test, not just of Crockett's arguments, but of her resolve. And every time she endured the sharpness, the condescension, the noise, she made visible what many had known instinctively: true power is not in volume, intimidation, or theatrics. True power is in preparation, clarity, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your purpose, your principles, and the truth you represent. Where arrogance tries to dominate, composure asserts. Where interruption seeks to erase, dignity reclaims. For those watching, the lesson was immediate and personal. Many saw themselves in Crockett's struggle, the moments when their voices had been cut off, dismissed, or undermined. And in her poised defiance, they saw not just representation, but validation, that endurance, intellect, and integrity are weapons far more effective than anger or retaliation. Crockett's example illuminated a truth often forgotten in the rush of conflict: waiting for the right moment, maintaining focus, and striking with clarity can dismantle arrogance more thoroughly than loud confrontation ever could. It was also a reminder that victories are not always loud. They can arrive in the form of a single, well-timed sentence, a pause that carries weight, a presence that refuses to be diminished. Crockett's seventh line did more than end a debate. It reframed what leadership looks like, highlighting the courage required to stay calm under pressure and the power inherent in listening as much as speaking. The audience understood instinctively, this was a triumph not only of intellect, but of character. And in that realization, inspiration took hold. Viewers felt empowered, reminded that every challenge faced in offices, classrooms, or communities could be met with the same blend of patience, preparation, and principle. Every act of interruption or intimidation is temporary, the integrity of your response is lasting. Crockett's stand became a blueprint, a model for asserting truth while maintaining dignity, for claiming space without aggression, for confronting injustice without compromising composure. Ultimately, the chamber's tension, the digital firestorm, the debates and hashtags, they all pointed to one enduring truth: arrogance cannot endure where patience meets principle. Noise may distract, interruptions may frustrate, but clarity of purpose, rooted in moral conviction, resonates louder than any shout. Crockett's moment was a demonstration of that resonance, a tangible example of how truth, courage, and dignity can prevail in spaces designed to reward disruption and dominance. For every viewer who had ever been silenced, doubted, or dismissed, the message was clear: your voice matters. Hold it steady, sharpen it with preparation, and wait for the moment when it can be heard without compromise. The power lies not in how quickly you respond, but in the certainty and integrity with which you do. In Crockett's calm defiance, audiences saw not only a victory in one debate, but a lesson for life: composure conquers noise, dignity defeats arrogance, and truth endures when it is delivered with conviction. Every situation carries the potential to turn interruption into opportunity, opposition into affirmation, and challenge into a triumph of principle. And as the echoes of that seventh line reverberated far beyond the chamber, one truth shone unmistakably: staying steady, staying true, and waiting for the right moment can change everything. 6 times he tried to silence her. 6 times he aimed to erase her voice. But the 7th time, Jasmine Crockett didn't just speak, she commanded the room, reclaimed authority, and reminded everyone watching that dignity cannot be interrupted. That single, precise, unwavering line didn't just end a debate, it shifted the conversation, inspired a nation, and proved that truth delivered with calm certainty always carries power. Her moment stands as a lesson for all of us: interruptions, aggression, or attempts to dominate can never outshine preparation, patience, and integrity. Crockett's example reminds us that every time we are dismissed, ignored, or underestimated, we hold within us the ability to respond with clarity, composure, and purpose. That 7th line wasn't just a political victory, it was a demonstration that the right words, at the right moment, can dismantle arrogance and elevate justice, respect, and human dignity. And now, that message extends beyond the chamber. Every share, every discussion, every conversation sparked by this moment keeps the lesson alive. It is a call to action for all of us to hold our ground, speak our truth, and refuse to be silenced by those who try to dominate with noise or intimidation. If you were inspired by Jasmine Crockett's unwavering poise and her powerful 7th line, make sure to be part of the movement. Subscribe, share this video, and join a community where dignity always has the last word. Let her example remind you, your voice matters, your presence matters, and the power of standing firm in the face of arrogance can change the world, one line at a time.